Okay, here we go. I just want to tell you at the outset, this is the most difficult program I have ever put together. It's encompassing so much in such a period of time, and I just want to go on record that if you guys have to pull out your sleeping bags, it was these guys all keeping this meeting going. Because I was praying for a short meeting tonight. It was probably the longest one I've been to. So I wish you all well, and if you fall asleep, it's your own fault. But what I want to tell you, this is going to encompass pretty much all of America, some extra special stories, and also a lot of stuff that I just saw, one-of-a-kind type things going in that direction. But I think the important thing is I'm going to show you the evolution of how I evolved as a rail fan, what I got into, and then more importantly, where the railroads went in the period of time that I was changing as well. So there's going to be, you'll see a lot of shifts in this. I'm going to go quick in points, but at parts, but I've got a lot of stories, and I'll try to tighten them up in the interest of time because they're good stories, but I've agonized over this. I've reworked this program since February. So yesterday was a final cut that I went through, so hang on to your seats because it's going to take a while, but it's going to be good. I will not bore you. Starting with this little picture here, if you don't think a lot of us are born with a rail fan gene, this was me at 3 years old, and my father told me that when he set up that train garden every year, I sat there every day like that. So that tells you something. If you got something working in you that goes beyond normal, it starts at a very early age, and my wife will attest to the fact that my mother told her that the first words, and she was a speech pathologist, so the interesting part is, usually it's dada, mama. My mother told her, and I didn't volunteer this, that my first words were choo-choo. And you know what? My mother didn't lie, but she told Robin that, and I got to go with that. But having seen my life, I'd say there was a lot of choo-choos. So let's go. Where I'm picking up on this is after Chessie and Conrail came into play, and I was getting a little fed up with the East, to be very frank. But I got a bit rejuvenated with Chessie because I started going up to Hindman, and I never really went to Cumberland. I went into Sand Patch and got into that. So what you're seeing here is a Chicago trailer train. We're on the back of a grain train going through Myersdale, Pennsylvania. And what started here was a situation where I spent most of my time here. This was the helper station at Hindman, Pennsylvania for Sand Patch. And I became very good friends with the engineers here, the regular engineers, Homer Friend, Jim Pick, Carl Kemp. And I rode with these guys all the time for the better part of 6 years. So when I went up to Cumberland area, I didn't do much I never went over to the West Virginia side or anything. I stayed on Sand Patch and rode with these guys more times than I can tell you. And that was really my enjoyment in those days. But it all started here. This was a later set of the helpers. As you can see, they started supplying them with very good power because these SD40-2s were new at the time, and they were used strictly in the helper service. So what would happen is there was no call, but when they were standing in the station waiting, a siren would go off from Q Tower to probably wake these guys up a lot of times and let them know that a westbound was coming. So what they would do, the siren would go off, they'd take off. Well, I put this one in here because this is my friend GM50 again coming down off Sand Patch with a coal train at Q Tower. These are the leads for the helper area. But you can see back in those days, they were not shy about using their train brakes coming off the Sand Patch. So just a cool shot from a cool locomotive that I like to follow. But what happened here is this is the helper actually coming out of the pocket at Q Tower. What we do is go out here, back down the eastbound main, get on the rear of a train at what they called Slip Rock, and get on the back of him, and away we go up the hill. And sometimes they work as far as Rockwood on the other side. Most of the times we got to Sand Patch at the top and came back down. This was an unusual move. This is up at the top coming through Sand Patch Tunnel. The helper's running light at this point, going down the, actually running east down the westbound main, which was kind of unusual, except that the capital limit at the time was coming, and they just cleared him for track 2, and we drifted down because there was a westbound waiting that had to have his helper put on the front. So that's why we coasted down. And at the top, as you can see, the snow. as you get down around Fairhope, there goes the Capitol Limited. We're still running down on number 1 track, and notice no snow. That's how much the elevation could change in those mountains, and it doesn't even look like we had a flake down there. This is just a shot of an empty grain train at Fairhope, which that anybody's been to that area, that's just a nice spot. You can work all day for pictures. So he's just shoving away at that point, very common. I tried to get as much on the ground as possible, but in those days I was tired of taking pictures up there, so generally I just rode with these guys all the time. And that's a good engineer at work. That's a guy that's ridden up this trail probably 10,000 times because we're on our way up the hill and he's reading his Western novel. So, I just want to tell you, this is a diligent railroader. That's Homer Friend. We became very good friends over the years. Super guy, very nice gentleman. I lost track of him about 1984. With CSX coming, they were starting to buy out the guys for long term. So a lot of these guys in his group were taking buyouts at that point. So he basically retired. I was busy with work. I kind of lost track of him. So 9-10 years later, Robin and me are in Friendsville, Maryland. And we're in a little convenience store, and I hear this guy's voice. And I knew the voice just from hearing him 1,000 times. And I said, that's got to be Homer Friend. And sure as hell, he was buying something in the store. And this town was named after his family anyway. So I went up to him and I said, Homer? And he turned around, and sure as hell, it was him. And hadn't seen him for almost 10 years. And he had long retired at that point. And we spent the day with him. He showed us a film that a Philadelphia group came and did a film on him after they saw his article that I wrote in Trains Magazine back in 1980 and made him famous. So people came from all around the world to ride with this guy. And he said, you made me famous. And he was so excited. He took us back and treated us for the day. And we had a great time with him. He showed us the clip that the Philadelphia station ran called Man in the Mountain. And it was about him retiring at the time. So that was a really nice surprise. But that was as much as I did with Chessie back in that era. So what I did was I started going to different parts of the country. So first I headed north up to New England, Canada. I started with the D&H, was late 70s, early 70s, was just a wonderful menagerie of things going on because of the mix of, you had XL, Lehigh Valley Power, you had a little bit of everybody in there, and they were busy at that time. So this was the last gasp of the Delaware and Hudson, and that's only on to what would have been a southbound coming into the yard, or yes, southbound coming into the yard. And this was, all the stuff's gone now, but 1979, 1980, when the period this was taken, D&H was a must stop. And Roger was with me on this one. A guy named Rich Allen was a conductor on the D&H out of Binghamton, and he gives people rides. He would volunteer to give people rides, so we rode his helper all day long up and down Belden Hill, and that's just a shot of one, and then we went down the other side and came up with one going the southbound. This one's going north at this point. This was another great rail fan spot. This is East Deerfield. As a matter of fact, if you got a current issue of Trains, there is a picture from that very bridge in there, but all this is gone. And at the time, this was the Rail Fan Central. This was like Perryville on a day when everybody's out there watching trains. There'd be 15, 20 guys on a weekend standing on this bridge on the west side. B&M was very hostile to rail fans. They were not nice. So I used to do what I call hit and run. I'd drive through a yard and take pictures and go out the other end because there was no hanging around. These guys were nasty. But they couldn't do anything on this bridge, so everybody gathered on there. I got there a couple times, and the one time I got there during the middle of the week, there's still 5 guys there. But the weekend, the one time I hit there on a Saturday, that bridge looked like it was going to collapse. There were so many people standing on it, everybody fighting for a position. And if you know New Englanders are a goofy bunch anyway. So everybody's trying to push everybody out of the way when something would come. So I just grabbed my spot and pushed along with them. So. But it was a great spot, a lot of fun. It was very busy back in those days because this is a big interchange partner with the D&H at that point. This was another one I chased down from St. Johnsbury. This was called the Mountain Job. And what this did was this came down, it was a daylight run all the way down to Portland, Maine on the Maine Central. And so what happened here is you could follow this train all the way down. There were not many clear areas. Crawford Notch had a good spot, and there were some trestles and things like that. So it was tough to, it was very closed in, but it was a fun chase for that distance down there, and it was daylight every day. So I knew enough about it that I decided to follow that. I put this in here because this was the beginning of the end for all three of these railroads. This is the very beginning of the Guilford system, which was one of the biggest. I won't even use the language because this thing will show up on YouTube someday. But this was the beginning, Main Central, D&H, and B&M, the three big parts of the Guilford system. In the transition period, this was an interesting thing to see, and eventually it got into the bland gray that they eventually went to, and that was just a mess. It was enough to make you sick. I went north again up to the Bangor and Aroostook, up to Millinocket, Maine, on a tip that they ran two southbounds down there in Northern Maine Junction during the late afternoon, which proved to be fact. But I always liked this because not only was it a BL2, which I saw much of on the Western Maryland, this is the only other time I ever saw an active one, but at the same time they dedicated it to us, so I thought that was a pretty cool thing. And the actual train I followed all the way down the line had 3 Fs, and by 1982-83, F units, they weren't anywhere down in our area anymore, so this was a real treat to follow this train down. It was solid boxcars, so which is almost as unusual as seeing an F unit now. So again, what I did was bounce even further north into Canada, and Roger will vouch for this. I'm sure if any of you got into Canada in the early 80s, it was a treasure trove. CP was loaded with MLW, but it was the Alco design. And they ran them shamelessly. I mean, they were on everything. And this guy's coming through, and people ask why I did black and white. If you'd seen, you can see the rain coming down, but every day was not a pretty day. So this is an eastbound above Hamilton, above a place called Bayview Junction. It was a CP main line towards Toronto. And a very active line, but lots of Alcos. CN didn't want to be outdone. They were not running as many of the Alcos at that point, but they still would put them on the front. This is a container train coming out of Montreal, and they were not ashamed to use Alcos either on the front. They put whatever was on there. So it was a gold mine. But I was never a big passenger train shooter, but it was this VIA in its early days was a rolling museum. So you had FAs, F7s. Brockville was a great spot on the CN, and CP came in and they did a lot of interchange work there. But these trains were too good to pass up. You just got to a point where you enjoyed them so much that you didn't. I shot passenger trains all day, and if a freight came, it was just the reverse of how I normally shot. I actually enjoyed that. But the gold mine up here was a place called Spadina, which was the engine terminal in Toronto. And they just gave you the run of the place. You go down these steps here, right to the roundhouse. The foreman would take you around, take you outside, let you roam around, and you could do stuff like this all day long. Nobody would bother you. That's all gone now. It's a baseball stadium. So, but that's what it looked like in about 1982. This is a swing back to Montreal. Interesting thing about this, they had a long tunnel called the Mount Royal Tunnel that came under Montreal to the station. He's about to enter that tunnel. These electrics were built somewhere in the early 1900s. The tunnel was opened around 1918, and word was it at the time that they were retired. This was all going. And so I wanted to get out there sometime in the 80s. By the end of the 80s, these box cab electrics were all gone. But some of these things were as old as 1918. So to give you an idea how long, we thought our GG1s did good. Not bad run for these things. So now I'm going to swing south. So what I did with a lot of these guys, the different geographical areas I really sliced and diced. Trying to go all over the place was impossible, which is how I started. So what I did was isolate a place in each part. So I went as deep south as I could think, and so I went to Louisiana for these pictures. So what you're going to see is all stuff in the New Orleans, but more importantly, has anybody seen the Huey P. Long Bridge? Anybody ever been down there? Okay, you know what it looks like. It's one of the most impressive bridges over the Mississippi out of all of them. But anyway, I kind of centered some of the stuff around there because I have family down there. And when I went down there, that was my first stop. Even when I got out of the airport in the rental car, I didn't go see my family out in Luling on the West Bank. I went down to the Huey P. Long Bridge, and they expected that. Oh, I guess we won't see you for 3 or 4 hours after you get here. And they didn't. This is the crescent on the southern end, the northbound crescent on the southern end, leaving New Orleans. I was lucky enough to get down there to get the sunset limited before Amtrak got it. So he was getting ready. He's at a place called East Bridge, and that's where everything came together to go across the Mississippi towards Avondale and then west from there. I'll explain Avondale in a minute. This is East Bridge. This kind of gives you an idea of the junction there. The SCL power freely mixed with LNN. They were not related technically at that point. There was no family lines at this point, but they interchanged, or they pulled a lot of their power. Gentilly Yard to the northeast side of New Orleans was where they would change over, and this guy had rights to go. He was going over the Huey P. Long Bridge into Avondale to interchange with Southern Pacific. This is a Mopac train waiting to follow him. The Mopac trains at the time, if you've ever been to New Orleans where all the Riverwalk area is and all now, they still got a couple tracks in there to serve some of the wharves, but back then that was it. The Mopac main line came along the river there. And so their trains would come through town, and the other ones would come through an area that was northeast of town and cut across the top of New Orleans, come in here, and they all come together at East Bridge. Another thing that was good about this area too is at the time, RSD-12s were all over the place on Southern Pacific. This was all their transfer power. This was their yard power at Avondale, which is on what they called the West Bank, the other side of the Mississippi, half Mopac, half Southern Pacific. So they shared that yard, but they were separate at that point. So each one had their own yard, but side by side. But these transfer runs ran up back and forth across the bridge all day long. So if you like Alcos, it was the place to be. So what happened a lot of times too is an SP crew would bring a train across the Mississippi, and in this case it was a southern run through. So what the SP crew would get off, the southern crew would get on and they would keep going. And so they didn't bother with sending the guys over to Avondale. What they would do is bring their train across the river and then just change crews there. And I wish I'd taken more pictures of these little track speeders back in those days, but unfortunately it was one of those things that went by and I wouldn't waste a frame of film that I could kick myself for now. This is one of the approaches to the Huey P. Long Bridge. This is actually a westbound. He's coming across. You can see the highway came up and paralleled across and then came back down. This was an amazing climb, but it was very impressive to see. And this is a later version of the Sunset Limited once it was Amtrak, so this is the late 70s. And this will show you, this was actually the west approach. So he's coming west, coming back down to ground level at this point. This is a Mopac transfer. On the other side of the river, the bridge bends around like this, comes around and goes in, and then heads towards New Orleans. So this was just a big transfer run from the Mopac that they were probably most likely taken to the southern yard at that point. So it gives you an idea of the expanse of this bridge on either side. This was one of my favorite shots. Back when I got there, a lot of farmland was still around, so he's actually coming out of their Avondale yard going east, so he will be crossing the Mississippi in a couple minutes. But again, this was the last stand of a lot of the big Alcos on Southern Pacific, so it was a good spot to be at that time because they were used mainly in transfer service and yard service in the New Orleans area. And the horse thing and all, that lasted only a few years, and then that was all gone. And in the end, just like Dorothy going to Oz, here comes the color. Late 90s, Union Pacific had taken over Southern Pacific, so this is the mixed stuff you were getting. This guy is coming up on the east side of the river, so he's climbing. If you notice the cars coming up, this bridge was extremely narrow on the road, and I mean tight. If somebody tried to pass you, you were almost scraping each other. And the interesting thing about this bridge is at the top, it was misaligned. So as you got to the apex of the bridge, it did a cut. So on top of that being as narrow as you can tell it is, 2 lanes, it moved in the center. And they didn't fix this until the 21st century. And I'll tell you, at nighttime when the train was coming the other way and you had a bright headlight, it was blinding, and then you had to deal with a narrow road and a misaligned road. And let's put it this way, you better not have been coming out of New Orleans with too much sauce in the pipe because it was hair raising at times. I mean, it varied. But these people got used to it, so they're all driving it. And when I drove it once in a while, man, it was nerve-wracking. Now I'm jumping to the heartland, so I'm going to keep moving. So what I did with this is, I started looking around. I had Iowa, Minnesota, I'm thinking of all these states. I said, well, I'll go to the heart of the heart. So I went to Kansas and Nebraska to kind of center these pictures. And this is a cheater picture because this was actually earlier 70s, obviously. This is the National Limited right after Amtrak takeover. And this is obviously the Kansas City Union Station, which I guess like Cincinnati, I haven't been out there for 40 years, but I think they preserved that too. And they did, and shame on them. Well, the difference between like 1973 and 1983, you can see how it had deteriorated at that point in time. Tower was gone, a lot of the tracks were gone. It was in as ugly a shape as it could have been at that point. So I'm glad they did something with it because it was like Cincinnati, beautiful facility. This is an earlier shot when Santa Fe took a lot of its passenger units out of service when Amtrak came. Santa Fe being sort of kind of reminded me of channeling the Erie Lackawanna at that point. They took their passenger units and put them in the freight service on fast freights. So they would use them on their piggyback trains. So this guy is coming in, he's a westbound coming in the Argentine yard, which was the biggest yard in the Kansas City area, Santa Fe's. Just a great spot on the east side because all the transfers from all the railroads in Kansas City, with the exception of Union Pacific, came in here. And that's a MOPAC transfer run waiting to come in, but there was always something going. This was just a good spot to stand. This was a Milwaukee Road transfer coming out with, needless to say, I felt right at home with these after growing up with them in Baltimore. So the H1644 was a nostalgic run for me, but they were using them all over the Kansas City area at the time, Milwaukee Road. And this Argentine yard's back in here, but along here they had a levee, and you could drive up along that, and they couldn't do anything about it. And you could take pictures. The engine terminal was right all along here, and you could take pictures all day long, and it was public thoroughfare, so they could not say anything to you. And you could sit there, and anybody who's been to Kansas City in that area, if you got up on that levee, you could see the whole, and it was a busy, active place. Now, west of Kansas City was a great spot too, because between Topeka and Kansas City itself, you had the Union Pacific main line, but it was also used by the Rock Island at the time with the Golden State route. So those miles between Topeka and Kansas City actually were used by 3 railroads technically, because Southern Pacific would come in on the Rock Island trains as well. And it was the last stand of the U-50s and U-50Cs. And so it was not uncommon to get these big GE units on the front. And they were as massive, not quite as impressive, I thought, as the DD-44, what were they? The big ones, the Centennial units that Union Pacific acquired later. U-50C, this is Armstrong Yard, which was the main Union Pacific yard in the Kansas City area until the mergers started taking place. And then this kind of was reduced to a secondary yard. And what happened was UP took over the Missouri Pacific Neff yard, which was a big, much more modern classification yard. So things changed, but at the time, this was the UP's main facility in the Kansas City. This is actually Kansas City, Kansas, not Kansas City, Missouri. And I put this in there because I just liked the white paint scheme when KCS had it, and they kept them clean, which is an amazing feat if you think about it. But these were nice and clean. They were coming out of the yard at Kansas City, and I just want to put them in because I really liked that paint scheme when they kept it clean, and they did a pretty good job. But Kansas City Southern I saw on both ends, New Orleans, Kansas City, but I never did anything with any other part of it, and I regret that because some of the hills in Oklahoma and all, I missed all that, but you can only do so much. This is a place called Paola, which was south of Kansas City, and this little spot here had 3 railroads come right through this little slot. You had the Katy, and you had the Frisco, and you had the Missouri Pacific, and this was a great spot to sit all day. You had 3 different railroads you could pick off, and traffic wasn't heavy, but it was consistent enough to make it very interesting. So I left that in there because it was a great spot to spend in that day and age. This is a place called Grand Island, Nebraska. Back in the day, Burlington Northern's main line out of what became the Powder River Basin all came down through here. But what happened was back in these days, it was getting more and more congested, and the Union Pacific. This is just a local waiting, but this is the Union Pacific, east-west Maine. So you had this crossing at grade, and what had happened was they were getting so congested, these trains would back all the way. But as the Powder River grew and more coal trains were coming down, this just became a tremendous bottleneck. So what they did was they built a flyover. So now if you went out to Grand Island, the BNSF comes over top of the Union Pacific. This is in northwest Nebraska, a place called Crawford Hill, which was, even the piggyback at this time was pretty rare because it was developing as a coal route out of the north end of the Powder River Basin. Burlington Northern at the time came out the north and south end, if anybody is, I'm sure some of you have been there. And it was just building at this point. So this was the daily piggyback train that came up the hill there. And they had a helper station down there at Crawford that they had 2 SD40s or SD42s, whatever they were at the time. And they had a fuel tender in the middle. So it was an interesting helper combination they used on the coal trains out of there. But this was all uphill all the way. But great spot. This is just one spot I picked out that kind of shows you the lay of the land up in northwest Nebraska. This is out in east of Council Bluffs, Iowa. This is an eastbound, CNW called their trains Falcons, which I thought was a kind of cool name. And they did all their interchange, obviously, with Union Pacific, as you know, Fremont and Omaha and all. So this was just a nice spot to get pictures and all, but I wanted to get something of the CNW in Iowa at that point. So that was that. This is the Union Pacific shops in Omaha. Again, all gone. Back in those days, you could write Union Pacific and get to their PR department, and they would give you a letter, and wherever you wanted to go, all you had to do was show that letter to the shop foreman or yard master. It didn't matter, wherever you wanted to go, and they give you the run of the place. I literally walked all through that shop building. They gave me a hard hat, and it was just, that's how PR conscious they were and how good they were at the time. This was another part of their shop complex. I didn't go into this part because it was too tight in there, and I couldn't have really gotten good pictures, and they had this bridge over the one side. So I figured, hell, you could see anything you wanted here and enjoy the whole thing just from a bridge. So you can see the mix of stuff they would have in there. Union Pacific was just a treasure trove back in the late 70s, early 80s. The stuff, they had just had any kind of power you could ever want, including these. So this is up on their main line along Route 30 that anybody's gone between Cheyenne and North Platte to chase trains. It was a racetrack. The 55-mile-an-hour speed limit they're showing there is only because of the curve. But if you saw a train, if you were going west and you saw a train coming east, I can tell you by the time you turned around and tried to catch him, you'd have to go many, many miles to get ahead of them. They had a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit. So these were the experimental units, actually, GP40Xs. That were the forerunner of the GP50 SD50 line, but Union Pacific had 6 of them. I caught 3 of them on this train alone, and they had experimental trucks on them too that were really strange looking, but never got any further than the GP40X. But these, they looked like baby SD45, so I thought they were kind of cool looking. But at the same time, they ran these for about a couple years, but the model was only an experiment to get the GP50 line in action, and so they only lasted on you. Actually Santa Fe had some. I think a couple other roads had them, and then after that they just kind of disappeared quietly. But they were very interesting. And this was a visitor center back in the late 70s at Bailey Yard. Anybody that's ever seen pictures of what they built now, they got a huge tower and a whole display. I mean, this is what it was in the late 70s. But even it was nice that they thought about doing something because they knew rail fans came there and all. And the other thing that was really cool, which you couldn't get access to later on, the cafeteria was inside the yard area, and it was all a railroad cafeteria. So all they had in there were crews. And I remember sitting with these guys, because I could go in at that point because they didn't care, and I'm talking to these guys, and they had a huge board up, and it was all lit up, and it had the train, the arrival time, the direction, and the crew that was called, and the time. So these guys would be sitting there eating or lounging around, and then the light would start flashing when their train would come, and then the thing would go from red to green, and when it was green, that meant their train was there, so they better be out there getting ready to go. Because UP didn't, I was going to say a bad word, but I didn't want to because of YouTube, fool around. So they kept going, And I mean, those guys, when they saw their names up, you'd see the guys get right up and go out. I mean, there was no fooling around because UP hauled butt back in those days. And so that was a great spot. And this is just walking around the engine terminal. I mean, I had free run. I could even go up in that tower, but I didn't push that because I just felt like, all right, I can get down and walk through anywhere that I want here, so I'm going to let it alone. And here's something we don't see anymore. Cumberland actually had one of these at one time. And C&O, when they really got their hooks into it with the chassis system, that was the first thing that went was the washer. But Union Pacific washed everything back then. So I just a normal shot at the time, but I'm glad I took it because how often do you even see it now? And this is probably one of the most interesting shots I got in North Platte, the Ready Track, because of the nature of what's here. Mopac, you got Western Pacific, Southern Pacific, and Union Pacific. Little did I know in 1978 that all those would be the same railroad someday. So that would show you 11 different railroads brought power into North Platte at that time. You could see Chessie, Norfolk and Western, you name it, any of the Kansas City roads that got up there. Everybody mixed power. It all came into North Platte, and they would either turn around and send it back or run through. Some of the SP stuff ran through all the way. But just an interesting dumb luck shot that I had the four components of a later UP at the time, which I had no idea, obviously, at the time that was going to happen. Okay, so I'm rolling good here. So now we're going to the west. So what I did was to pick out a few spots that I was at. I'm not going to belabor the point, but I got a good story in this one. And of course, in Colorado, I was very fortunate because when I was in the Air Force, I was stationed in Denver for 5 months for schooling. And when I was there, I never got up here. But this was actually a picture that was taken in 1979 because I couldn't get up there at the time. It was a whole thing trying to get somebody to go up there. Nobody wanted to take the time to go up there and watch a train come out of a tunnel. So that was a hard sell. And we didn't have cars, so I was stuck. But I got revenge on it about 11 years later. And it's just a cool spot. Now here comes story number one. I was in Pueblo, Colorado, and I'm standing on a bridge, and this empties Rio Grande train came out and turned south, which I thought was kind of weird. And there was another rail fan there, and I said, "Why is he going down there?" "Oh, he's going to Jansen to interchange with the Colorado and Wyoming." I said, "Oh." I didn't have a clue what that was. But I figured I wanted to chase down there anyway because the BN ran down along there too. So I figured, well, I'll follow this guy down. So I follow him down at Trinidad, Colorado. He takes a hard right and starts heading out. So he goes out, and there's a little small yard, bunch of tracks. And so they pulled in. I got a couple shots of these guys coming down. And they were at the point where they started waving, and they thought it was kind of cool this character's following them down. They didn't know what I was doing other than that, standing there taking a picture. So lo and behold, we pull into the yard, and these guys say, "You want to come up and go for a ride?" And I didn't really at the time because I'd ridden on enough trains that I figured I'd rather get the shots with the Colorado and Wyoming, who I'd never heard of coming in. But I said, "I tell you what, can I?" They were respotting their caboose because they were going to change the empty train for a loaded train and go back. So he's positioning his caboose at this point. I said, "Can I ride in the caboose?" I said, "I've never ridden in a caboose." And he said, "Yeah, you can do what you want." So I'm back there with the conductor and the flagman, and we went back, switching the train around and all. So we get up the other end, they finish, they get positioned to get the coal train coming in. Colorado and Wyoming comes in, they start doing their thing, switching all the cars around. They cut their caboose off and sit it there. And then all of a sudden I'm standing there, and this guy pulls up in this little truck. And first he gets out, and he looked like a Air Force dress uniform. He had a blue shirt and dark pants, and he had a cap on. And I'm looking at this guy, and I said, "What the hell is he doing out in the middle of here, walking up to this caboose?" And these guys all came out, and they're like saying hi to him and all. Well, it turns out that this gentleman here, was the mailman who was delivering the company mail for the Colorado and Wyoming, and also the pizza that they had ordered. So what you're seeing here is the crew getting their money together as this guy's holding the pizza and the company mail. And the little guy hands the thing, says hi, goodbye. Those guys go in the cab. I guess they started eating while they were getting their train together. So just one of those unique things, but it was the weirdest thing. I'm thinking, what is this guy doing? And that's what they're doing there. They're getting their money together. So this is the Colorado and Wyoming empty train going back to the mine. I had shot so many pictures over here that I figured it would be good because I probably would never see this railroad again, and obviously nobody's going to see it again. It's gone. But at the time, I saw on the other side that it made a big bend, and as Ted would say, I channeled my inner mountain goat and started climbing hills and looking for a spot, and this is the one I found. So it was a good shot. I'm glad I got it, and it's even more valuable now because the track's gone, the trains are gone, the railroad's gone. Now jump up north a little bit up to Sherman Hill in Wyoming. This is a place called Dale Junction for anybody that's been there. Great spot. You could spend days there working the different angles all the way up. And this was a low-grade line that was built later that a lot of the heavier trains would use. This guy's basically going to be going downhill. So just a great spot. Now, the interesting thing about Sherman Hill, and the reason I'm showing you this is because there were two ways to get in here. One was you came in from this side and came in, and what they did was the ranchers were very accommodating to rail fans back then. What they told you was, you can come across our property, but they wanted to make sure that you shut the cattle gates. That's all they requested. So as you came through an area, you could open a gate, go through, close the gate, and they were fine. And the other way was from the north, and that was anybody heard of the Ames Monument that they built to the Transcontinental Railroad? Well, it wasn't much to see. It was like a big pyramid, but I wanted to get a picture of it because it was the original main line that came across the Transcontinental. So I went up and got a picture of that. So I used to use topographical maps long before we had any other way of picking our way over these back hills. And so I'm looking at that and I said, well, I can take this road over. And it came over and I figured, well, I can go through this ranch land and come into Sherman Hill from this direction. So, and it worked for a while until I got into the ranch land and ran into this. And I got stuck. I figured, and these buggers said, this is our country, we're not moving. So I figured, well, I can either go back and go all the way around and lose an hour, hour and a half, or I can plow through. So I gingerly pushed them out of the way, up the hill, praying that that rancher probably did not have a shotgun waiting for me at the top of the hill. But nobody was out there, no human being. And I worked my way through the whole crowd very slowly, and this guy was trying to give me the evil eye, but he moved too. And they all moved out of the way, and I got over to Sherman Hill that way. So I always thought that was interesting because that was something one-time event. There's one right there. Now, going over to Utah, what was happening here, and I'm sure people have heard of the Bingham Canyon mine. Well, this was it back in the late 70s, early 80s. And it was an electrified Kennecott copper operation, largest open pit mine in the world, copper mine. And what you're seeing on there, they use diesels and electrics. And all those are trains you see on there that would move out. They had a marshaling yard right outside the complex here. And then they have the road power work between the smelter and come back in. And they have constant movement all day long. And those trains were powered by these big electrics here. And it was really a cool operation. This is all gone now. But at the time, you could chase one down and then get an empty one going back as soon as he cleared. And they just constantly went back and forth. So, but a very, very unique operation. And it was just amazing to see. Now, I took one shot here. I took this off of a color negative because it was damaged, so I kept it in black and white. We had a second home in New Mexico for 25 years, so I was only 45 minutes from the Golden State route of SP, and at this time the Rock Island was gone, obviously. This is early 90s. At the time, this is a place called Carrizozo, New Mexico. This guy's an eastbound that will eventually head to Tucumcari and then eventually into Kansas City. The reason I liked it, New Mexico had its own look, but also the line was, it was all semaphores still at the time. And on top of that, they ran the whole railroad from El Paso up to Tucumcari by track warrant. So, I mean, they were constantly on the radio because the dispatcher was clearing blocks, and they would say, you can run block so-and-so to so-and-so and so-and-so. It was just an interesting way. It's the only time I've ever seen a railroad run by track warrant the whole time, all the way from one division point to another. So it was just an interesting little sidebar I wanted to put in there because it was a cool spot, and the semaphores were still all along the line, so it was very unique at the time. And I put this one in early Powder River Basin in Wyoming because CNW was still in charge of their coal at this point. This is pre-Union Pacific. And they had just gotten these C-42-8s, and they were just out of the shop. And I thought their paint scheme really worked on this unit. A lot of railroaders didn't like these units, but as a rail fan, I thought they were pretty cool looking. And I think they did a great job with their paint scheme on this. It didn't last that long before Union Pacific got a hold of them, but that was what it was like back then. Of course, their merger, the partner on the other end was the Burlington Northern. This guy going out the southern end, but it was. When I first got there, it was active, but it was nothing like what it became later in the 90s and all, when they eventually put in 3 tracks and all. I didn't see all that. I didn't get out there at that point. But even back then, you could see 60 plus trains a day. And by the time it peaked and before it started back down, they said they were running upwards of 120 trains a day on that line. I never saw that, but 60 was not a bad number to watch in a day. Now, I put this one in. I put this in here. Yeah, there you go, Colton. I put that in there partly for you, Rich. But at the same time, this is what was very unique were towers in the west. You just didn't. It wasn't like the east even at the time I was out there. So Colton Tower controlled the Golden State route. This westbound is going into what they going into West Colton Yard. Which became the main Southern Pacific Yard in the LA area and eventually put Taylor Yard inside the city out of business. But he's crossing the Union Pacific and Santa Fe lines that eventually go to Cajon Pass going that way. Thing was unique here was actually there were very few towers outside of metropolitan areas. You could see them in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Stockton, Sacramento. But once you get out on the line, you didn't see any towers. They were passé in the west, except for here. And this lasted well into, I think, into the actual early 90s. But again, because of the traffic, they eventually put a flyover over this. So the Southern Pacific now, or Union Pacific route this way goes over top. I haven't seen that, but I knew they did that because I read it. Here's one of my favorite stories. What happened here was, I'm in a train on what they call canyon siding on Cajon Pass. And we're stopped here because they had broken down. So he lost his time. And actually, even though he's moving north and all, he was actually a westbound. This guy was technically an eastbound. And the funny thing that would mix you up is the Santa Fe and Union Pacific over here were eastbound. Everybody's going in the same direction, but it was different directions. It was confusing if you were listening to it. When they were saying westbound up here, they were talking about going east. Anyway, so this guy was broken down. So I got talking to him before this guy got here, and he said, my brakeman is about 60 cars back. He said, we're fixed, but we're stuck now. He said, because we're waiting for one to come down. He said, can you go pick my brakeman up? I said, yeah, I'll ride down there. So I rode down the service road, picked the brakeman up, brought him up to the front, and they said, come on up, you can get a picture from up here. So I go up there, get in the cab, and got this picture, and the guy goes, you want to go to the top? And I'm thinking, yeah, I'd like to, but I got my car down here in the middle of nowhere, sitting on a dirt road, and I said, how in the hell am I going to get back down? So, but you know, it's one of those things, even though you think about it later and say, gee, that was crazy. When you're about 28, 29 years old, you're thinking, hell, I'll walk back. So I rode up to what they called Highland, which was the top of the grade, and they went over the top, and there was the end of the side. It was double track at the top, and then it went back down to single track. So they got another red signal. Come on, how the hell am I going to get off this thing? And they had to stop anyway. They knew there was another one coming, so we're going to have to stop anyway. So we're over the hill down the other side, and we stopped. And I'm thinking, and later on I realized I had to walk back 11 miles back down Cajon Pass to my car. And not only did I walk down, but it was hot as hell. And it was the longest one, and I had no water. I got down to the car, and I said, that was the dumbest damn thing I have ever done. And since then, it's been totally supplanted by a lot of other dumber, damner things. But this was it at the time. And but you know, I look back on it now and I laugh, but at the time, I'm thinking I had to walk 11 friggin' miles back down a hill in 100-degree heat. Now, what kind of moron does that? A rail fan.
You forgot to mention the snakes.
Oh, I didn't know. I could tell you a couple of stories about snakes too. But anyway, this is an eastbound, going the same direction as that other train, but he's officially eastbound. And what I liked here was just the rock formations on Cajon. This is coming around the Sullivan's Curve area. But you can't beat the West for some of the scenery. And Rich, you're going to see some beautiful scenery where you're going, man. Oh, yeah. But I think what this also does is it shows the immensity of the area. It can make trains look small. And this, to this day, this is the biggest horsepower train I ever saw. And that's why I put this picture in here. 34,500 horsepower on this train. And he went up Cajon Pass like a passenger train. And he was sailing. Now, I'm sure up at their yard at Yermo, they probably took some of this power off once they got over the hill. But what an impressive display this was going up the grade. And he was, and he went up, he really went up it like it was a racetrack. And they ran him up what they called the South Track, which was a 3% grade. And he took that hill like it was nothing. But there's actually blue cut. It's mentioning that, Gary. This was the other big power that was out there at the time, the DD35s and DD35B. That's an ABA combination worth putting into a picture. So that was gorgeous there. Just a really cool open area to get, again, another eastbound. Now we're going to bounce north into the Feather River Canyon. Feather River Canyon, the Fraser River Canyon in British Columbia were probably the two prettiest places I've ever been. This railroad was a scenic wonder. I mean, you could go up and down the Ketty Y, you could go all the way to Portola. They had the Williams Loop, the bridges like this, spectacular bridges like this. Ted, actual high things that I had to climb up. Ted likes my mountain goat stories about climbing up things. Well, this was one too, Ted, because there was no way to get up this hill except pick my way up through the bushes. But it was worth it because of the shot. Ted always makes comments about my climbing ability. So, and I put this in there because in the end, the Tehachapi Loop became my favorite place of all time. It was just, you could work it all day, every day, and wind up with umpteen different angles. But this, I call this your basic loop shot where the train's looping over itself. But what I did here was I put a little chronology of things together, different visits there to show you a little bit of how things change. This is Santa Fe, and then what happened here, you had Burlington Northern on the front. Now, this was not a Santa Fe train. This is actually a Southern Pacific train that they were testing radio equipment at the time. So they borrowed a Burlington Northern unit, and they have a former F7B unit, and they were testing radio equipment at the time, a very early stage of that, to eventually get away from the manned helpers. But that came later in the scheme of things. And then eventually that evolved into the Burlington Northern Santa Fe when I went out there later on. So now we shifted gears into what is now just another part of BNSF. So I did a lot of these from the same location to kind of show you things over the years. This is double track now, and they bypassed the tunnel that this one's ready to go into, because what they do now with the double stacks and all, they run them all around. So they didn't daylight the one tunnel, they just went around it and put a second track in. And this was early SP, and all in the same spot. You can see a Santa Fe train waiting to go because it's all single track down under the loop itself. And then eventually that became Union Pacific. So you can see over the years, I saw the evolution of the power of the railroads themselves, and now of course it's all UP and BNSF. But at the time, I got there through the evolutionary process of the roads themselves. Now we're going to go northwest a little bit, Gary. You'll like some of this, having been there. Thompson River Canyon, which I liked as much as the Fraser River Canyon, because it was a totally different look. You didn't have obviously all the trees and all, but it was just as pretty a country as you could get into. and CN and CP had joint trackage. This is strictly the CN line at this point, but they came together at Kamloops and ran east-west, and they split that. So it was a smart move on both the railroad's parts. I threw this one in here only because I got there on occasion. I wanted to show you, this was I love the Cascade Tunnel, but it was not an easy place to shoot or get into on this on the east portal. But I wanted to put one in here. This was actually taken in the 21st century. We were up in Canada. So I said, well, since we're in Washington State, I figured we'd go up there. So I just wanted to show you, I did like the tunnels. This is a very cool operation. Back in the, when I was here in the mid-'80s, they were going to close this line down because they were building something called the Mount McDonald Tunnel. And I got pictures of the tunnel construction. And what that was going to do is going to be at a much lower grade because all their eastbound trains into Vancouver, coal, grain, and all had to come up this grade. And it was brutal. And they had a helper station down at Rogers. And it was two 6-unit sets of power that they would put into the middle of these trains to get them up over the mountain. Well, that all disappeared when the tunnel was open in the late 80s. But I wanted to get out there before they did that. So fortunately, I got pictures on this part of the pass. You had to walk back into here, and another whole story for another day is my meeting with a grizzly bear on here. Fortunately, he went his way, I went mine. But it was on this walk into this place, because you had to literally walk into it. And that was a helper set coming across there, and that was a pretty impressive looking set of power that they put on there. And they had two sets of them. And it was a great operation, but it was gone by 1990. And this is Banff. This is the Canadian, which was the flagship of VIA at the time. And Banff, obviously, you can see, was just a beautiful area. He's the westbound Canadian on the CP main line. And then I was lucky because they put the Supercontinental was put back on for a few years in the mid-'80s period. And he's actually on the CN main line out of Edmonton. So I was able to get both of their premier passenger trains at the time. The Supercontinental kind of went out and came back on, but at the time in the mid-'80s, he was on again, so I was able to get both their premier westbound trains. This is just combination running here down along the Thompson River. It's just a beautiful area. You couldn't go wrong. Gary will vouch for that. It was easy. All you had to do was point your camera, didn't you?
There were no bad pictures.
No bad pictures. You couldn't take a bad picture on these lines. And that's the Thompson River Canyon. Again, mid-train helpers working here. I mean, that's the scenery. Now, granted, the saturation is up on this, but it was not that far from being that spectacular, obviously. You just couldn't beat the scenery that was along this line. And further down in the Fraser River Canyon, and what happened here was that because of the natural rock formations, they couldn't cut through this. So they swung the line around and came in and ran reverse in. Now, this was the westbound, this was the eastbound main line that CP and CN used out of Vancouver, and this was the westbound line. So again, they became running left-handed all the way into Vancouver from this point. But back here is where they made the switch. And transitional times a little bit, as far as what I'm talking about here is watching the evolution of railroads. It kind of changed. It was starting to take me out of the mode of being a rail fan. It was a slow, progressive regression, to say the least. But I'm kind of showing you this as things evolve. So again, I had a tough time with the chassis system for anybody that likes the chassis system. I got used to it, but I never overly enjoyed it, but I photographed it. So they evolved, obviously, with this railroad, which finally got its act together and stopped calling themselves family lines for marketing purposes. And just before they went into CSX, they started painting all their stuff in their seaboard system. So eventually they evolved into CSX. So Norfolk and Western, this was down at Lambert's Point. They were using the big C630s in coal, just switching basically. And they would go back and forth, and I just can't see people in this day and age doing that, but that's how they did it back then. And so they had that. You had the Southern, this is outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, so they combined to make that. So it was kind of the evolutionary process that went on through the 80s for me. That, we were just losing. After losing all the railroads we did in the 70s, I'm starting to make adjustments here, and then here goes the Chessie system, here goes the Seaboard system, now we got Norfolk Southern. And then on top of that, I was getting used to Conrail, which I hated with a passion at first, but I started liking them. You know, they got their act together, and I thought, you know, it's an alternative to the other ones. So what happens to him? He turns into that. I'm thinking, I can't get away from this. So just to slap me in the face another time, it turned into that too. So I was dealing now with, by the time I got out of the 80s, I said, I got to keep going west because I'm running out of railroads in the east. So what did they do to me in the west? Burlington Northern, Santa Fe became that. I'm thinking, there goes them in the 90s. And right same year, you had, well, Western Pacific was early. Western Pacific went the year after I got out there the second time. In 82, the Union Pacific got them pretty quick, but Rio Grande buys the Southern Pacific on paper, and then what happens is they become basically the Southern Pacific. The Southern Pacific adopts the Rio Grande speed lettering, but in essence, the Rio Grande and SP operated separately, but then Rio Grande became technically part of the SP because the last time we went up there in about 94 to Winter Park, Colorado, and it was all SP power. So SP joined with them and became our friend, the Union Pacific. So the evolution in the 90s, by the time I got to the end of the 90s, just about everything I ever liked was gone. So yeah, at that point I was becoming a little jaded. I was thinking, you know, this is not the railroading I grew up with. And Union Pacific was everywhere, and then you had Burlington Northern, Santa Fe started eating everything up, and even up in our house in New Mexico, where I was able to get the Santa Fe and Southern Pacific. Now it was the same things I could get in California or anywhere else out in the West for that point. And so I really was getting tired of rail fanning. I started the downward slide. But the thing that really got me back in the 80s was this, because I was a caboose freak. I only rode in them that one time you heard about. But at the same time, I always liked taking pictures of cabooses. I just thought it was the exclamation point on the end of a train. This is at our place, Raj, Sterling, coming off Cleveland, Lorraine, and Wheeling. And he is picking up his orders. I just like the shot because if you look real close, you can see he just grabbed them at that point. And Ted was wondering why I wanted a picture of an EOT, because then when I go out there in 2026, I have to look at that. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry guys, it just doesn't have the same appeal. So I'm thinking, okay, that's the modern railroading, so we go on. Now, we have done really good on this program, guys. I cut this thing down to the point that I'm really proud of myself, because you could have been here all night with what I started out with. But you know, the good news is the next time I do a program down the road, it'll be on a particular subject. I'm just doing a lot of wide range of stuff to kind of show you the whole evolution of me and the railroad industry. But this is where I started. This is, if anybody's ever seen my posts or anything, I've always talked about the Sisson Street Bridge. Well, this is where I started. Right on this bridge here in Remington section of Baltimore. And I stood on this bridge for the better part of 5 years and took pictures of B&O trains. And that's where it started. And that's how it started. This is 1966 from that bridge. This is the westbound Delaware Park race train going back to Camden Station. This was a daily run. This is where I learned how to be a railroader. This little stub end yard here called Huntington Avenue with a crew called the Oak Street Crew. Somewhere along the line, the B&O Historical Society is supposed to publish an article on, I wrote about 6 months ago, and they said they wanted an article on my Oak Street experience. Someday that's going to show up in their magazine, The Sentinel, but I'm not in control when they publish stuff like that. But someday it'll be a big story about this. So anyway, that was the 60s. And then in the 70s, late 70s, probably around 79, 80, this is what it looked like from the same bridge, a little bit different lens situation. Of course, you can see Huntington Avenue is gone at that point. This lead went down to still, they were using Oak Street for a couple customers, which was a yard about a quarter mile down, but it was nothing like it used to be. So I just happened to stop there on a visit because I liked the old neighborhood because my mother's family was all from there. And this was coming into the early 21st century. You can see how it's all grown in at this point. What they did was the signals for the siding used to be on the bridge itself. They actually mounted them on the bridge, but they extended the siding a little bit. After all those years, they decided to move the CPLs and set them up there. So this comes into early, and then this is what it looked like in 2025 with the double stack project that was going on when the line was shut down. Same spot, but you can see it was basically a laydown yard for the construction companies at this point. But I wanted to get a picture of it while they were regrading everything for that whole project, because that was a once-in-a-lifetime event. So follow through on that. I wanted to take you back to what the Oak Street job looked like arriving at Huntington Avenue. And they work here, put their train together, and drift the cars down, and the engine would follow Oak Street because they had to push them up into the yard. So this job could have anywhere from 3 cars to a lot of cars like this, depending on what customers had things on order. That's what it looked like in 2019, 2018. You can see they had changed the signals out at that point. You can see how it's grown in now. You can't get down in this area. The growth is so thick. If I wanted to take a picture from the ground, I couldn't. There's no way to get down there, and this area here is all fenced in. So all you could use was the bridge itself. And that's another shot of what was Huntington Avenue Yard, to give you an idea. You can see the full scope of where they left their equipment and all. And it was an interesting transition to see, because it's a once in a life, you'll never see this again. So I wanted to get it while it was kind of in transition. And this is 2026 Sisson Street. Little did I ever think I was going to be outlasting the bridge itself, but I outlived the bridge. It's gone. This was Sisson Street Bridge right here. And I don't know if they're going to put it back in or not. There's no sign at all that they're going to replace that bridge. And you think by now they would have started something, but they cut this neighborhood off from over here, and now these people have to go all the way around and come around. It's not a big deal, but it doesn't look like they have any intentions. And of course, the modern art of the 21st century is abundant, which I love no end on the freight cars, but that's another story. Now, a few quick tales. Probably anybody's ever been to Striegel in Baltimore would recognize engines that were eventually rescued and became very famous later on. But that's where they sat for many years. Here's you go. This is railroading 1966. I just want to tell you, for all you safety-conscious railroaders, this is how, when they had a problem in the brake line, I want you to notice the guy's technique. Holding on with one hand, T-shirt, no safety equipment, loafers, and in a position that at any moment, if that guy had lurched or anything, he'd be part of that train. So, but back then, no 3-step protection, none of that kind of stuff. He'd get off, and when the engineer saw him again and signaled him, he would move. But I always liked the technique of the time. And I would say to, is that something you're supposed to do? And it says, it's not something you're supposed to be taking pictures of. I said, well, I won't show them any. I never did till this day. So I kept my word. I said, I won't put them anywhere. And I didn't until you guys saw them. Now, switching back to Cumberland, I always liked this. The operator at Virginia Lane on the west side, before all the automation up there, he gave orders to every eastbound coming into the yard. So what was interesting is that he would flag the eastbounds as they come around the bend, if you've ever been up there, and he would signal them that they could proceed in. If he wasn't out there giving that flag, the train had to stop until the operator came out and gave him permission to enter. And then he would give them orders as to where they were to yard their train. Now, they had radios, but B&O is very, I don't know what it was about B&O people back in those era. They didn't like to use the radios. They still would do this kind of stuff or hand signals, and they had radios. And matter of fact, the guy at Sandpatch told me one time, Sandpatch Tower, he said, I don't even talk to these guys. Nobody will talk to you. He said, I try to tell a train to do something. He said, they go by the signals or anything. He said, they wouldn't go by anything I say on the radio. So they were still using telegraphs at the time. So to give you an idea, so their operators would use the talk between Connellsville and Cumberland would talk on the telegraph. And that's how they did it. And they write out the list of trains coming and all. But this guy, if he had a westbound coming out, he would use a yellow flag. And if they had all the switches lined up properly, he'd give them a signal. I mean, it sounds archaic now, but it was a cool thing to why. It was just part of railroading that's gone now. And this was my favorite guy of all time. I mean, I took many pictures of trains at speed going by BA Tower at the west end of Bayview Yard. But this guy's style was just unique that I had to put him into this category of tales. It was not unusual for a guy to stand on the steps and grab the orders, but this guy did it with flair. and I always loved the operator. I don't know if he came out there to encourage him or to want to pick him up after he fell off, but the guy looks like he's waiting. Is he going to make it? And Roger was with me on this one. You remember when we were on the Southern Tier and we went down here out of Binghamton, and we were watching these guys from New Jersey, and the crew was getting picture taken with this kid. This helper was going to help it. This is the ex-EL main line over Gulf Summit over Sirocco Viaduct. And this was a helper that was waiting for an eastbound while they were still running some stuff on that line. And so he invited the kid up, so the crew poses with a kid. Yeah, stuff you don't see anymore. But so these guys were, I don't even know who these two little hoodlums were, but they didn't seem to be with the father and son. But these guys invited all of them up. So Roger and me were taking pictures, and we're thinking, shit, we're the rail fans here. And they invite this crowd up, and they go for a ride over Sirocco on a helper, and we're taking a picture of it. So I said, I put this in because, again, a part of railroading that you're never going to see again. This is even more interesting because this is my young cousin with me. Most of the time when I went on trips, I went by myself. And a lot of the trips out west and all, that's why I have a lot of stories, because I was by myself most of the time. And I was shot at, frozen, roasted, you name it, arrested. You name the situation, I about had it. Snakes, oh yeah. I sat on a rock, man, and the rattler was sitting right down there, and I just gingerly fell back over the other side of the rock. But what was going on here is this was a train coming out of Northumberland, going down towards the Harrisburg and Nola area, and we were kind of following them down because we were heading back down that way. And the guy came out on the platform there, and he's calling my cousin over, and my cousin's 10 at the time. He's a grandfather now, just to tell you the evolution of time. But at this time, and the guy came down off the step and handed him a bunch of orders and all. I mean, it was a different breed of railroading back then, but I just thought it was a cool little thing that this guy did, and he was thrilled. And this is what Roger takes me up to keep me interested in railroading. I said, what the hell? I said, this is in Crescent, Pennsylvania. They were scrapping a bunch of old GE power up there. And I thought somebody had a great imagination to do this bus-train collision. So that always, I wanted to put that in there. But in all the years that I rail fanned, I made, and I don't say this in a negative way, but I made very few rail fan friends because in my profession, I worked with people so much all the time that my rail fanning was an escape. So for me, to get out west or go somewhere and be by myself, I was fine with that. I had no problems. But then you run into certain people in your life that you just can't get rid of. Like they stick to you like glue, and you have them, they're around a long time. And the guy that actually got me to take pictures in the 21st century of trains was this clown that's here tonight, which is our newest member. And that's Mr. Durfee. and there we are in front of two old train wrecks in front of an old train wreck. So I thought that's about as appropriate as a picture as you're ever going to get. But this clown actually brought me out of retirement. So Roger and me have been friends for 51 years and met in Cleveland at the EL, Erie-Lackawanna Convention. And we've been best buddies since. He is now a rock star in the rail fan photographic scheme of things. And I'm retired, and you have to look at a lot of black and white crap. So that'll teach you. Now, one last thing, I wanted to tell you what finished me off for railroading, because I took this other picture of the 2026 train. And I said, when I took a picture of that, after I took the EOT, he got a little further down the line, I looked at it and I said, this is exactly what makes me sick about railroading in 2026. I mean, that's the end of the train. I said, that's depressing. So what I wanted to do is just leave you on the note that that's what I used to like. Going one way and the guy giving you a highball on the other side. So that's how I want to remember railroading. But I will tell you that this group has got me reinvigorated. So you guys, I mentioned at the last program that you guys really got me juiced for coming to these things. Because even when Ted first got me up here, I'm thinking until I found out there were a lot of railroaders, former railroaders. So I said it was not one of I call them rail nerd clubs, where the guys show up with all the patches on and do all that stuff. I said, that's not my style. But I found out that it's not true about this group. And I said, I really appreciate being a member of it. I think Rich has done a fantastic job, and that's why I jumped on board. And Logan and me will eventually put together quite a legacy program for everybody. And I want to put a plug in for that too, that if you've got stories, you want to tell about your experience here, we need help in telling the story of Rich has done his part. We're going to get him for some more, but I needed cooperation from a lot of folks. I need a lot of help. And if you give me the material, we'll put it together and make a program that can be passed down to future generations to see how this group ran, how it grew, how this man made it grow, and you guys make the organization. So put your part into it, because you'll be part of a history that 50, 60 years from now, stuff like this, which is long gone, even though we'll be long gone, the point is we live on through organizations like this. So I encourage people, as we approach it and send out more information, please let Logan or me know, and we're going to work it out to make it easy for people to do a little video interview type stuff and all. It's nothing you can't talk about that you wouldn't know about. So we'd appreciate the help, and I want to thank you all. And the next program I do will probably be more in the nature of just one individual thing that I can hone in a little bit more. So this is the end of the wide scope of the evolution, but I wanted to show you how the railroads changed, how I changed, how I came back, how they left. And from that point of view, thank you guys, and I'll be back in a few months when I put something else together and agonize over it.